Hello and welcome to this month's PDU podcast presentation titled Project Communication on Virtual and Global Teams. I am your host, Cornelius Fichtner, and you know the spiel. As always, the most important person sitting here with me in the studio is, of course, your presenter. This month, again, we welcome Mike Graupner back. Hello, Mike.
Hi, Cornelius.
All right, so if anybody since you've been here last has forgotten who you are, here is a quick intro again to Mike Graupner, PMP CSM, Certified Scrum Master. Right, exactly. So you are a well-known presenter of project management topics as well as a practicing project manager. You have over 20 years in the project management field. You've worked in the aerospace, consulting, mortgage, healthcare and oil refinery areas. You've worked on high-tech programs for DARPA, developing state-of-the-art integrated circuits, space-qualified navigation satellites, as well as core IT systems. Experience in engineering, manufacturing, and IT systems, as well as non-technology projects. And your past projects include everything from developing space-qualified GPS systems, advanced research projects for the US government, to IT governance and data warehousing systems. You bring a very strong and diverse background, coupled with a thorough understanding of methodology. You're a strong believer in methodology being applied as appropriate, which is something that you and I have talked offline many times, how important that particular item is. Your training style is focused on enabling learning using highly interactive classroom experience, which is a bit difficult here on a webinar, but that's what I'm here for, asking all the questions that the students cannot ask because they are sitting at home. And your background includes both co-located and virtual teams of multi-nation and multi-generational members. For the last 10 years, you've been involved in developing and deploying effective business processes, supporting project management, quality management, and systems development life cycle. So, once again, Mike, welcome back to the PDU podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Before we really delve into the topic, we have a couple of housekeeping slides to get through. Learning goals first, agenda second. Mike, what are the learning goals of your presentation?
At the completion, we should be able to define and explain how communications impacts projects and project executions. We should demonstrate your understanding of the communication processes, devise and confidently control communications during your project, identify and analyze problems when communicating, evaluate other people's commitment to communication, and adapt to working in teams and leading the communication process. You also should have some fun along the way.
All right. Let me ask you one question, though, before we move on to the agenda here. What is your personal interest in communications on project? What prompted you to talk about this, to have a presentation that you're teaching?
Well, I'd have to say for the last 20 plus years, I've been amazed at how bad I'm at communication. so
that is not a good start.
This has been developed as self-preservation, not a theoretical exercise.
All right. So this presentation really is to help you and not us.
It's to remind me.
All right. Perfect. On to the agenda. Mike, what will we be looking at?
We're going to look at, first of all, we're going to introduce the subject, and then we're going to talk a little bit about communication theory. I think that's a big, important piece of understanding how to communicate and having a baseline to work through. We're going to talk about virtualization and globalization barriers. We're going to talk about technology barriers, social media impacts, and communication improvement strategies.
All right. One more question here for you, because in your introduction, we said that your background includes both co-located virtual teams, multi-nation and multi-generational members on those teams. Tell us a little bit more about the projects that you have led in this virtual environment.
The current project I'm working on has I'm working from California, primarily for an East Coast team. There's 5 different companies involved, including offshore in India. So we have just basically everything. We have cultural barriers, we have generational barriers, we have physical barriers, we have time zones, and all of these challenge us on our communication process. In communications, the first thing that I realized is that I communicated by accident, not intentionally. So I really believe that communication should be a planned and intentional process, not an accident.
Okay, let me stop you right here. How do we do this? Okay, how do we make it an intentional process?
Well, we're going to talk about things like barriers, about how much communication is done visually. And when you have WebEx or conference calls or emails, how much do you lose? So there are techniques for communicating in different media. And so we want to make sure that you think about that. You think about when you write an email. We've all gotten the 16-page emails, right? We read the first 2 paragraphs and then we don't read anything else. So each media has its own special challenges. So that's what I mean by not being an accident.
Okay, so in making it an intentional process as you are planning the project, communications planning in general, and then also as you are communicating, making it intentional. Don't just sit there and type, but think about what is the medium I'm using, how do I communicate, who do I communicate with, etc.
And what action what action do I want to invoke?
Okay, cool. On to the next bullet here in the communications introduction.
Having a process. I think we've all, if I look at my friends who are senior project managers, they live and die by processes. They do the same thing the same way time after time. And so it's really talking about saying, okay, do you have communication processes that you're using? Perfect communication. I got to tell you, if somebody can do it, it's certainly not me. And so I want people to understand that it's almost part of running a project is having communication problems. So you need to have strategies to address communication problems. And the last great communication is possible by understanding the pitfalls and addressing the process weaknesses of the team that you're working with now. No 2 teams communicate the same.
Well, Mike, you just said that no 2 teams communicate the same, and this slide here, the title says it all. How do we then communicate?
Well, one of the things that I find was shocking when I did the research is that only 7% of the message come from the words we use. Vocal quality, volume, pitch reflects our sincerity, our enthusiasm, our knowledge, our passion, and that often is more than just the words. So if only 7% of the communication is done by the words and you're an email, then there's 93% that you're not communicating, that you've robbed the person of understanding.
All right, and where does that come from?
The tone, inflection, our body language, white space on an email.
Between the lines.
Between the lines. When you use full justification and you have nothing but black, you lose the ability to read and follow paragraphs and stuff like that. So all of that comes into play.
All right, and how do we make all of this effective then?
Well, a lot of it is about what you say and how you say it. One of the things that I've learned over the years is I choose my words very carefully, especially when I'm doing email, because it's so easy to offend or give the wrong impression, sound stern when you're not stern, we all know that joking in an email is probably not the best idea.
Right, that's what emoticons are for, right?
Yeah. So adding feelings, but doing it in the proper way is, I think, one of the big things. We communication. I believe communication is more by emotion than by words or by technology.
So on the next 3 slides, we're going to take a look at 3 communications model, how they progressed and changed over time. Why are we looking at these 3 models here?
Well, one of the things is choosing the right model for the right environment. All 3 models are appropriate for today, but they're not appropriate for every situation. So I picked up some models to say, how do you think about communicating? Are we going to do it in the style of 1948? Are we going to do the style in 2004? Or are we going to take more of a interpersonal style?
Mm-hmm. All right. So what are we seeing here?
So the 1948 model was really based on a transmitter receiver like a radio. Is you transmit the message out, the receiver gets it, and there's noise in the middle. There's no feedback loop. You don't know whether the message was received or not. And this is the type of things when you do an email blast. You send it to. My project has typically on a conference call has anywhere from 26 to 56 people on it. You can't have an interactive communication model. You have to have sort of a sender-receiver model, and that's what this is. It's not the best in a lot of the situations, but it's your only choice in many situations.
And between the previous slide and this slide, 56 years have passed, and we are now looking at the communications model 2004. What is this one here?
This one shows the complexity. You've got messages, languages, media, consumers, feedback loops, all of this. So this is really day-to-day communication, and what I wanted to bring this forward to say, look, there's a lot of things that can go wrong, and very few things that can go right. So you have to understand that just simply communicating that you want to meet somewhere for lunch can be a complex task.
And now we're moving on to the sender-receiver model, as this one is titled here. In the PMBOK guide, everybody who's participating in this webinar here is a PMP, and they do remember the sender-receiver model from the PMBOK guide. Looks a bit different there. Are we talking about the same idea of the sender-receiver model here?
Yeah, we're going to dig a little deeper than the mile wide and the inch deep of the PMBOK and say, okay, everybody has a specific role in communication. The sender has a role, the receiver, how you communicate the verbal, nonverbal, all of that needs to be understood. And sometimes verbally expressed or specifically expressed on who's responsible for what. So this slide is really just to show you how many communication theories are out there, and I actually gave you the link if you wanted to go read them and stuff like that. I really do recommend you go read these and get an idea of the different theories of communication, because nobody's come up with a unified theory of communication. So I use these as basic knowledge on how I move forward with communication.
Well then, we've seen the models, we've seen the list of many theories that are out there. Where does this leave us?
Well, one thing is that this is one of those areas that has been constantly changing. Earned value management has sort of been stable for the last 20 years, but this hasn't. So this is something you actively have to pay attention to and update on an annual basis. You've got to read, you've got to research, and you've got to get better. I think you'll always find that you have opportunities for improvement, but if you make it a proactive effort, you'll really see a big difference. So it's a complex process, and true communication does not happen until the receiver has properly decoded the intended message.
Okay.
And I think what we need to do is also review the responsibility for communication.
Right, and this is on the next two slides where
Right.
we'll talk about the senders and the receivers' responsibilities.
Absolutely.
Right? Okay, let's jump into those. Beginning, of course, with the senders' responsibilities. What are they?
Well, the bottom line is if the sender muddles the message, it's doomed to failure. So the sender has to make sure that it's clear as possible, using suitable words. As an international person, you realize that the words do not mean the same. And I come from the Midwest. California and New York do not have the same context of words, so you have to be careful. Working with the East Coast, I'm actually working with a lot of people out of Atlanta, and so you have a southern flair for everything, and just the way that people communicate, they're slower in their communication.
They're slower in maybe their speaking, their
Right.
communication in their heads is
Right.
same speed, but the way it comes across
You give
seems
people
slower. Yeah.
a lot of time, pregnant pauses, and
Right.
stuff like that. And so if you're used to communicating from people from New York, you're willing to jump in and all of that. And also what I find is that on the conference call, people tend to talk over each other. So that's another challenge.
Right. And from my perspective, coming from Europe and having moved to the United States, what I have seen is I've seen an incredible change in my way of communicating. I now communicate like a U.S. citizen. I communicate because I live in the United States, and 99% of the time I communicate with Americans. Therefore, my communication style completely changed from a European approach over to a U.S. approach. But I'm aware of that. So when I communicate with people in Europe, I change the way that I talk to them and use different kind of words and make
Right.
sure that I use the words that they understand. I think that's the next bullet point here, right?
Right.
Avoid ambiguous words, making sure that the message is clear, that the words I'm using, the way that the person on the other end is going to understand that word, that I know how they are going to read what I'm writing.
Absolutely. One of the things that I see is the next bullet, which is people tend to bury their important ideas in paragraphs and stuff like that. So if you're and you can do it verbally as well, is if you can talk in bullet points and try to keep your message short and clear, that helps a lot. I'm sure we've all had people that just talk on forever and never seem to get to the point, or if they get to the point, by the time that they've gotten to the point, you've stopped listening.
Yeah,
So-
or my wife, she tends to send emails that are incredibly long. And I tell her, look, people aren't going to read everything that you write to them. But she's a writer. She's a fiction writer, so she enjoys actually sitting there and crafting a message. But in business, that doesn't
See,
really go
she's
down.
communicating in her style
Exactly.
and trying to force the receiver to adapt.
Yeah, maybe for her receivers that's okay, but when I see those messages, I'm thinking the people that I communicate to, they would never read emails this long. I mean, paragraph after paragraph after paragraph.
I think
It's
you're
absolutely
more
incredible.
of a bullet point.
Yeah,
type
I'm more of a
communicator.
bullet point person. Exactly. So the style of this slide here works quite well. So that brings us to the next one, because my wife has receivers and I have receivers, and you recommend here review with the receiver. So how would I review with the receiver?
Well, you could do active listening. In the another side is, why don't you tell me what I said in your own words?
Okay.
Okay, big, powerful technique. I'm learning Spanish, and so what I found is when I'm talking in Spanish, I talk slowly, I talk purposely, and then I review and constantly check if we're on the same page. Mostly because the words that come out of my mouth have nothing to do with the intended words. But
Yeah.
but reviewing and checking and saying, Did you understand this? Did you understand that?
Did my message come across correctly? Was it understood correctly?
And don't ask, did you understand that? Because the answer is always yes.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's yes or no, it's always yes.
Right.
So you have to say,
what did I say?
What did I say? What do you think?
Mm-hmm.
What's your opinion? Those type of things. Am I talking over you? You know, have you participated? Those type of things.
And of course, last but not least,
nonverbal messages. I have a habit of thinking a lot. And so I'll be walking down the hallway and I'll be thinking, but I'll have a frown on my face. And so
yes.
So everybody says, well, why are you so unhappy? And it's like, I'm not unhappy, I'm thinking.
Yeah, exactly. I know the situation here. Now, in review here, this looks like a lot, but if I look at these bullet points, I do this constantly. This is something that seems to be ingrained in the way that I have learned to communicate over the past few years. It comes naturally to me. It is not an additional effort. It doesn't cost me any time. It cost me a lot of time when I didn't do that, because then my communication ended up completely misunderstood, and it took me more time to actually, correct any misunderstandings. So doing all of this, making this part of how you communicate, will actually save you time.
Absolutely, and it's a learned skill. It's very few people are naturally born with this, and that's the message here. Is you've got to think about it. You've got to go from unconsciously incompetent of communication to unconsciously competent. And I'll give you an example of the difference. Is when you talk to a 3-year-old, they're unconsciously incompetent of so much. When you drive, my drive is consciously incompetent. But when you drive, it's unconsciously competent. Is you don't think about driving. So you want to get to a point of having it naturally involved, but you also want to understand that if you create an unconscious competency, you rob yourself of process improvement. So you have to sort of go back and do sanity checks on that.
All right, enough with the sender's responsibility. Let's move on to the receiver's responsibilities.
So the receiver also has some responsibility, and we have to develop that in our project teams. We have to develop the expectation that they have certain responsibilities. The first one, and the most important, is show courtesy. My current major frustration on the project team is people will talk over each other. And I'm the type who will let everybody finish. And I can go 20 minutes without getting a word in edgewise and getting asked 40 questions. And, because there's so much in transmit mode that nobody ever goes into receiver mode. What I was told is listen 80% of the time, talk 20%. And I think that's a really good thing when you're trying to receive a message, is let them talk. Make sure that they finish their ideas. So some of the other things, tune in and focus. Multitasking. What happens with conference calls is everybody's multitasking. Put it on mute, and they're answering emails and all of that.
Yeah,
and it's
under the table with the BlackBerry.
Right.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I was multitasking. What are we talking about? Well, I'm sorry, but if we're in a meeting, tune in and focus. Big thing is repeat the message back to the sender in your own words.
So if the sender doesn't ask you, do it anyway.
Right. Take a proactive approach. It's everybody's responsibility to communicate.
Right. So did I understand you correctly that I'm supposed to repeat back to you what you just said?
Absolutely.
Perfect.
But in your own words. Make sure that you're not just parroting the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Next one. Acknowledge your understanding by supporting the sender's feelings. This is a big one, is when you realize that communications is about connecting at an emotional level. Tools like boy, that sounds frustrating. Tell me more. Open up a lot of additional avenues of communication. The other one is when somebody's excited. You sound very frustrated. This must be important to you. Why? Let them further define what they're talking about. The next one's the hardest one to learn, is take a moment before you respond. Don't agree or disagree. Think about it. Everybody's so programmed to fill in those pregnant pauses. But a lot of times what I do is by thinking about it and taking 5 seconds, I'm able to further drill in on what we need to talk about.
I can tell you that this one here from the sender's perspective can be frustrating. If somebody actually does this to you, it takes getting used to. One of my first project management jobs that I had, we had a very exquisite developer on the staff, and what he used to do is he was a pipe smoker. When you asked him a question, he would take his pipe, unlit obviously, and he would start sucking on it, and he would take 10, 20, 30 seconds of just pure thinking without, talking to you, and then he would give you his answer. And his answer would always be very well fleshed out. It would be, his final answer. He would make a lot of sense. In the beginning, if you're not used to that, you're waiting for him to respond. You're thinking, well, he needs more information, so you keep talking, right? You don't give the other person a chance to talk. So if this is the kind of person that you have at the other end, be aware of this as the sender and give them the time they need to actually take the moment to respond.
Yeah, and I think it's also a cultural thing. I think the Americans are, fast food, instant gratification, so the communication style is much more like a machine gun back and forth than a calculated, process.
All right. And last but not least here,
ask clarifying questions. You'll be surprised when you ask clarifying questions or you repeat, the concepts back, how much you'll learn and how much you'll have missed. One of the things I do is summarize major points. I said, well, and I usually do this after like every half an hour, is saying, okay, here's what I've heard. Am I on the right track? And as a project manager, listening is probably more important than talking, because listening will provide the feedback. You're either on the right track or you're off the right track. If you start talking, you shut down the lines of communication.
Right. So Kersner says 90% of what we do is communicating. He doesn't say 90% of what we do is talking.
Right.
Big difference.
Yes. And I would use the 80-20 rule. Listen 80% of the time, talk 20.
And with that, we have come to the end of Module 1. But as always, here are a few actionable items that you can apply almost immediately. What are they, Mike?
The first one is read up on the theories. Go to the website, read up, get familiar with the theories, see how they apply. Maybe not all of them will, but invest some time. Second thing is review your communication disasters.
So what went wrong?
Yeah, I don't know if you experience this, but I have a lot of communication disasters. It's just I have to laugh because they were so bad, and I was in a hurry typing, and a few wrong words here and there, and then all of a sudden we're off track.
Right.
Not even in the same country.
Yeah. And of course, as a consequence of that, then the next bullet here that you are suggesting is to create your personal lessons learned.
Yes. I think, again, communication should be an intentional process. And if it's an intentional process, it should have a process improvement component. So you have to be honest. You have to say, look, I'm human. You've got to forgive yourself. If you need somebody to forgive you, I forgive you for your communication problems. What I don't forgive you for is having them over and over and over and not doing anything about them.
Right. And last but not least, since there's not only you communicating, but there are other people as well, you suggest that we discuss the sender-receiver responsibility we just looked at with our teams.
Absolutely. All of the slides that I create are not copyrighted, and you'll be able to find these on the internet. I suggest feel free to copy them, format them the way you want, and make that as a part of your project kickoff. Is review the sender-receiver responsibilities. Make sure that you have rules in place. Don't talk over people unless it's the culture where everybody talks over people. In New York, the culture would be radically different than down south or in California. So those type of things is to at least go through and verbally state, and then that sets you up for reminding people as you go through the project.
All right, thank you very much. We'll see everybody again in Module 2.